How's it going, guys? It's Seth here. Today we're going to be teaching you how to build a window screen. I used to work at Ace Hardware where I repaired screens on the daily. Now, you might need a new screen if a pet damaged it, or the weather damaged it, or even if it's simply just old and it needs to be replaced. One thing I would do before building a completely new screen is to check on your old frame. If your frame is in good condition, there is no need to build a completely new screen, and you can simply just replace the mesh part of the screen. If that's the case, you are more than welcome to skip ahead in this video to where I start applying the mesh to the frame. Let's start with our materials here. For starters, we got our screen frame here on the right side. I've had this pre-cut at the hardware store, but I will make sure to show you how to cut it to the right size to make sure your screen will fit. Next up, we have the screen itself. We have our corner pieces, our pull tabs, our tension springs, the spline to hold the screen in place, our spline roller. We have a box cutter so we can cut the screen when we get it into place. And lastly, we have a screwdriver. This isn't really necessary, but it's nice to have something a little blunt to put the spline into the corners of the frame. Duct tape is also optional. It kind of helps the process a little, and you'll see why here in a couple seconds. And lastly, a tape measure will come in handy for when you are measuring for your screen frame. Most of the time you can get all this stuff as a kit at the hardware store. However, in the case that you can't, these are all the materials that you are going to need to build your screen today. When measuring for your frame, you're going to want to measure the outside of the frame that your window screen will fit in. Do not measure from the inside, as this is where your screen will fit in, and if you do that, then your screen will be too big and you will not be able to fit it into your window. This window, for example, measured 34¼ inches across the frame from the outside to the outside. However, that's not going to be the size that I cut the actual piece of the frame. I'm going to take that measurement of 34¼ inches and subtract 1 5/8 of an inch. This is because the corners of the screen are approximately 3/4 of an inch. And then we're going to take off another 1/8 of an inch to make sure the screen will fit through the frame when you have it all done and built. This screen, for example, will take that 34¼ inches and subtract 1 5/8 of an inch to get 32 5/8 of an inch. I would do the same thing for the vertical side of the window, and then that is the measurement that I would cut the actual piece of frame for my screen. On a side note, also measure the depth of the frame in which your screen will go into. That way you know what size screen frame to buy. Now we're going to build our frame. Now this is not the same window that I actually measured. This is for my bathroom window on my second story, but it's going to be the same process. Let's start with our corners. Make sure your corners face the correct way. You want the spline to be able to go into the corners as well. I'll put a little picture up here in the corner for you. For whichever side is going to serve as the top of your window, this is the side that you're going to place the springs in. The springs are pretty simple, just slide them into the frame and then you're going to slide the corners right in on top of them. Lastly, I'll take my finished frame and I will go through and tap all of the corners onto the ground. This just makes sure that the corners get into the frame snugly and that you will end up with the correct dimensions. Moving on to actually installing the screen to the frame. Personally, I like to duct tape the screen to the ground. It just holds it in place and makes everything much easier. Also, don't forget your pull tabs. You're going to want to place these on the opposite sides of your springs. Now get your screen laid on top and you can get started putting the spline in. As you saw, I used my screwdriver to jam the spline into the corner there. And now I'm going to take the wide side of my screen roller and roll the spline into place. I personally like to cut it at the corners. However, if you'd like to round the corners with the spline, that is totally fine as well. Let's move on to the next side where we are going to do the exact same thing. For the last two sides, you're going to want to give a little tug on the screen as you roll across. This is going to make sure that the screen is tight across the frame. Only give a little tug and do not pull too tight, as this would create a bow in the frame. Once you have your spline in, we're going to take the spline roller one more time. This time we're going to use the skinny end of the spline roller, and we're just going to go over all the spline on the screen one more time to make sure that it is pushed into the frame and it is tight. Lastly, we are going to take our box cutter or our knife and cut off the excess screen. Make sure to cut the outside of the spline and make sure to hold your knife at a little bit of an angle to make sure you do not cut the screen inside of the frame. If you'd like, you could go over the spline one more time, and then you are good to take your duct tape off. There you have it. You have your screen, and it is ready for your window.